So I want to thank all of you for being here. It's always amazing to me that we fill the house, which is pretty cool. And I love helping TAG. TAG is very, very cool. I am a long-term TAG supporter. I'm going to do the same thing I do every year, which is I want to talk about the landscape that we're living in this coming year first, because the landscape leads to the predictions. And I'll do it in two pieces. One is economic and one is technical. I'm going to go pretty fast because there's a lot of material here. And then we're going to have questions and answers and comments and whatever afterwards. So you're welcome to ask questions. This is a strange year. It's a volatile year. It's a busy year. As I was joking with somebody here, there's no lack of material in 2019 to make predictions about. We're probably all terrified to death, and no one knows where it's going, and so on. So it makes predictions, I think, more useful probably relatively than in some boring years where it's pretty clear that Amazon is going to make money. And in looking at this year, so I've structured this a little bit differently. And one thing that came up about 3-4 months ago was that it suddenly became clear to me that there are basically three things going on. And if you just wanted to watch those three things, you'd get a pretty good picture. So what are the three things that I think are pivotal this year? One of them is cars. Cars. Now, it sounds stupid, but it turns out that cars have become, I think, not only the key enabler for most technologies that are critical technologies now, which the Communist Party has picked, therefore, as its prime enabling platform, but also economically, simply the sale of cars is differential across countries in a way which becomes very interesting as metadata. So if you want to know how countries are doing, watching car sales isn't a bad way to do it. And what you're seeing is the integration of thousands of technologies into one platform, getting priced based on policies that the government has in mind, and then exports happening based on all kinds of interesting interchange between countries, and then the resulting sales. And whether you're tracking it by company, like watching Ford fire people this week in Europe, or whether you're tracking it as a thing, where car sales are going down in China and up in the US, it makes for a very interesting view. So cars is important. Energy. So there's no question how volatile energy is right now. As I think the only guy in the world to make the call last time when the energy price went from $93 down to 45 to 50. Well, it's now back down to 45 or 50 again. And it's a pretty interesting question. What's going on? You can watch Saudi Arabia scramble trying to save OPEC. Not going to work. So where are we going with energy? And who will win? Who will lose? Where does the money go? And how do different technologies and countries and companies prosper by knowing that? There's an interesting factoid that came up about a week ago, and this is not a joke. In the Permian Basin, the price of natural gas went negative, which means that they're actually having to pay people to take the gas. So for those of you who think, as I do, that in some sense energy ought to be free or close to it, we're going from a time where oil was $148 a barrel to something new, which Saudi Arabia is fighting tooth and nail, which smells an awful lot like 20 bucks. So whether you're using coal, gas, oil, solar, renewables, it doesn't matter. There is a huge shift going on, driven partly by climate change, and yes, as we all know, there really is global warming, and related things that are totally unrelated to climate change. So this is a huge deal, and I think you watch energy, you're going to learn a lot, and you'll push yourself into a place where you can benefit instead of lose from the changes. And the third is infrastructure, and you've all talked about 5G. I won't even start with that, but all of the repercussions of 5G are fascinating. So whether it's our friends at Alpha making a lot more money, which I think will happen thanks to 5G, or whether it's looking at the support network in a different way where maybe the cable systems are unnecessary. That's a change. So there are many, many levels of 5G effects, and there are many levels of infrastructure effects, all of which are happening at the same time. So whether you're interested in the Boring Company, or whether you're interested in light rail or high-speed rail, smart cities, all these things are infrastructure related, and they all impinge upon how countries are going to do and how companies are going to do. So I've then taken two big pieces. One is China and one is America. And I've done this because that's kind of the story. I mean, if you want to talk me into Spain being the story, go ahead, Bob, but I don't think you're going to make that argument, and I'm not going to settle for it. So really, This is a fist fight, and we know what it's about. We're told every morning what it's about: stealing our IP, forcing companies to disclose their IP, and then subsidizing it into unfair prices where it's dumped on a global market. That's what the fight's about. It's really a fight about one model versus another. I'm going to give you a very quick run on where I think China is, because there's a huge change that's just happened. So I think China is going down right now. I think that the people who run China are completely terrified. And if you look around at how eager they are to settle this tariff dispute, that's why. So whether you're looking at car sales, smartphone sales, equity markets, manufacturing, the value of their currency, and now the real estate market, it's all bad news. There is no good news in this story. There is no safe harbor. They're out of chips. There are no other asset classes that are doing fine. Imagine that, because they've been moving from asset class to asset class, when I say they, I mean the Standing Committee, for a long time, trying to play poker, basically, trying to keep your eye off this and do this, including selling their own people shoddy goods in real estate to get the money out of their pockets and keep the GDP high. So game's over. That poker game is over. And the final bit of it was property. And so we had written, I think 4 months ago, that when the property boom busts, very bad things would happen in China. And I want to thank Evan for providing me with a couple of data points here. Here are 4 or 5 things you probably don't know. Real estate represents 1/4 of the PRC's GDP, according to Kigson. Real estate represents roughly 30% of economic growth in China. Real estate is 85% of the average family's assets, according to the New York Times. Failed land auctions have doubled this year, according to the New York Times. And last but not least, sales of real estate are down 27% year on year during the autumn festival, which is September, October of last year, normally a huge buying time. That's what's happening inside China right now. So this is going to have an effect on everything. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're in business, this is going to affect you. And you don't have to be exporting to China for it to be true. The issue of domestic instability inside China affects global volatility. So we have to be careful we don't get things backwards. And I hate to, I know it sounds funny, but when I read media or watch media or listen to media today talking about this issue, I don't hear anybody getting it right. I don't hear NPR getting it right. I don't hear Fox getting it right. I don't hear CNN getting it. No one's getting it right. Financial Times is not getting it right. The Economist is not getting it right. I don't know why, but they're not. So you hear all this garbage about the trade war. By the way, it's not a trade war. It's a tariff war. And then you hear all this stuff about why and what and when. And as far as I can tell, it's all wrong. So I would just encourage you to think for yourself on this issue and not trust your favorite anchor person. Having said that, therefore, don't get it backwards. What we're often told is that the trade war is caused by the United States. No, China was doing to us what we're doing to them 30 years ago. So that's not true. And then how does that relate to stability? And the fact is, really, in my opinion, that the stability or instability came from picking the wrong business model. When the team running China picked this new model, it was about 2000, and then went deep into it. So by 2003, they were totally into it. By picking that model, they picked their own destiny in a way. If you decide to be a bank robber and someday you're caught, you had picked your own destiny ahead of time. That's what happened to China. They were robbing everybody for 30 years, and they got caught. And we finally got angry enough to react. And so did the Germans, and now the British are, and so are the Norwegians, and so are the Australians, the New Zealanders. Guess what? It's going to be tough on China now. So this is really about these models and how they fit together or how they harm each other. One of the funny things about all this is if you're a trading partner of China, it's not a bad thing during their slowdown to make fewer transactions, because the fewer transactions you make, the more money you'll make, because you're losing on every transaction. So it's actually okay. one of the questions, maybe the question of the year to me, is Huawei, which is the center of this whole schism. Now we're seeing the world of tech break in half based on security issues, but those security issues all relate to this question of IP theft. So when ZTE, for other reasons, was penalized by the US about a year ago, you probably all remember this. The Commerce Department decided that US companies could not sell components to ZTE anymore because they had blown their promise about Iran sanctions, and they did it twice. ZTE was out of business in about 10 days. That's the second biggest telecom equipment company in China. That is a big company, 10 days. And I think that rocked China to the core. I think that rocked the Standing Committee to the core. I don't think they had any idea. I believe you have to appreciate a sense of triumphalism inside of China and how that might blind them to their own weaknesses. And particularly for the people, not for the Standing Committee, but for the people who live there, who I like, by the way. So a tough situation. Well, we backed off. President Trump said, okay, we're going to take a rain check on that. We'll let you live. Give us $2 billion. We'll give it a pass. Here's Huawei, much bigger company. Huawei is the key company in China. They're now being, as you're aware, their CFO is not in jail. She was in jail. Now she's got an ankle bracelet. But she's waiting to be sent here to the United States for a trial. If we do to Huawei what we did to ZTE, here's the question of the year. Will we do that? And if we do that, what happens to China? If we bring Huawei to a complete halt in 10 days, what happens to China? That's got to be the top line item in the minds of the Standing Committee right now. There can't be anything more frightening than that for them. So again, they're very eager to do whatever it takes to get a deal done. The only other part of this, which I think is, I've expressed it as an earlier concern, which is, what do you do if you're Xi Jinping and these things go sideways? You probably turn into military adventure. And if you saw his speech about 4 days ago about Taiwan, it went something like this: we will get you. Oops, if you're from Taiwan. And of course, the president of Taiwan immediately objected. And so it's worrying to hear someone put his name on that, because this whole issue of face and so forth. So you have to wonder, particularly in that culture, when he makes a statement like that, whether he doesn't intend to back it up sometime during his time in power. So enough of that. The US, how are we doing? I think the main lesson for people who live here is markets do not equal economy. Markets are crowds of people, highly psychological, and then things driven about 80% now by program trading, and they are not the economy. So they may go up and down based on CNN every morning, but that has nothing to do with how are you doing today, unless you own a lot of stock. So in fact, we have strong corporate earnings right now. We have a strong dollar, which is good. We have low unemployment rate, historic lows. We have strong jobs, almost historic job recruitment. We stopped doing quantitative easing, which is very good news. We were able to get off of that. And those of you who were here a year or two ago remember me talking about what happens when you step back from that poker game. Do you get hurt? And we were able to step back from that poker game and not get hurt. So that was a great piece of work. Car sales are up. IPOs are back. The Fed is moderating its stance on raising interest rates. Corporate leaders and politicians are waking up to the China risk, finally. And companies, I think, will suffer from what we're calling the China short. So if you're Apple and you put all your marbles on the bet of China will become our winning hand, that's a mixed metaphor, you're going to lose. And they are losing. Don't confuse that bad management with how America is doing, because that affected the markets. Apple's problems affected the markets, but have almost nothing to do with America. In fact, if anything, it was a proof positive that Tim Cook screwed up and should have spent more of his time and energy on Germany, France, Spain, Holland, and America rather than on China. So he screwed up, but America didn't screw up. One final kind of thought is, I don't know the answer to this. I don't think anyone here knows the answer to this. How much of the American stock market is owned by China? Anybody? I have no data on it, and I think that you can't get the data. That's what I think. So I don't know. I literally don't know. But I do know this. I know the Chinese know that Trump's weak point, his weakest point, is he watches the markets. He is not smart. I think he's a smart guy. He's a street fighter. But as smart as he is, he doesn't get it. He thinks there's some connection there, and there isn't. So they know how to play him. Play the markets, you play Trump. So I'm just a little suspicious that if they know that, which they do, and if they had the lever, they would use it. I'm going to go quickly through other countries. UK, it's going to be a hard Brexit, right? It's going to be a hard Brexit, unless they don't leave at all. And I have been thinking for 2 years that they're going to back off on that whole thing. But the clock is definitely running out, so we'll see what happens. I want to say that David Cameron, I think, was the worst prime minister in British history since Neville Chamberlain. And I feel like I'm offending Neville here a little bit. David really screwed the pooch. So he brought in the whole idea of Brexit. He thought it wasn't going to happen, and now he's split the Great Britain into a lot of pieces. Bad guy. Germany, this is ironic because Angela Merkel, who I really respect a lot, was the person who let 1 million, whatever it was, people come into Germany in 1 year during the very first flush of migration, whatever that was, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And by doing that, destroyed the EU, created Brexit, and then destroyed her own party and her own career. Bad move. So it's kind of fascinating if you watch the numbers. I think these days it's about 40,000 a year people who are coming to Germany. Fine. But that million number was the wrong number. I think too often in migration, people don't talk about numbers, they just talk about things, words. But it really comes down to numbers. So 40,000, fine. 1.2 million, bad. And Germany, it changed the entire complexion of politics throughout the entire EU. Everything you read about Viktor Orban and all the nationalists and the AfD party, and all this came from that one decision, I think. Middle East, I'm not going to talk about Middle East. There's just nothing to say. The only thing to say about Middle East is, what would happen if oil were $20 a barrel? How many of their problems would just go away? Because there's just nothing to fight with. Take all that money away and just let them fight with sticks and stones. It might be better. Turkey, I think Erdogan is becoming a little bit like Assad. And the only thought is, look out, Kurds. Russia, we're back to $20 again. If you wanted to really affect Mr. Putin's plans, $20. $20 oil, he's done. Literally done. The country's done too, but he's done. Really simple. Right now, he's lusting, of course, to recreate the Soviet Union, and it looks like he's after Crimean ports, Western Ukraine, Moldova, South Ossetia, the rest of Georgia, Mediterranean ports, Syria, and the destruction of the EU, NATO, Great Britain, and motherhood and apple pie. South Korea, so the quote I wrote down is, Kim loves me, he loves me not. And I wanted to say, hey, wake up. You're falling in love with a Chinese finger puppet. Japan, get ready for a shiny, big, new Japanese Navy, Army, Air Force, and Space Command. Italy, Greece, done. China owns them, check the box. Eastern Europe, done. Russia did the same. Aren't these board games fun? I think that's how Putin sees it. The tech landscape. So incrementalism reigns. We kind of warned you, I warned you, when it became clear how fast China was adopting this model, that they would suck the ROI out of innovation from companies that otherwise would be investing a lot more money in new things. And whether you're going to CES this year or whatever you're doing, I think things have just gotten a lot more boring than they were 5 years ago. There are lots of nice high points in biochemistry and all kinds of places, biotech, but basically, who needs another one of these? No one, which Tim just found out. So it's kind of boring. And I worry that until we solve this model problem, we won't be able to get out of the mud enough. We won't be able to retain enough of our earnings, have price power enough to do great work, which we all want to do in the West. If we look at chip wars, it's kind of fascinating. So Intel has been backed into servers. They're a server company now. And they have 90x% of the server market. But 4 days ago, Huawei announced that they have brand new chips for servers. Uh-oh. You don't have to be a genius to see the next step. So when you watch the state of China come after Intel, how long will it take before they start looking an awful lot like Apple or Oppo? It's a problem. Global markets are going to split in two. So we have this thing, which I mentioned, security, but it really isn't security, it's really IP theft. Insecurity is really now the status quo. Is there anybody here who feels secure on the internet? I mean, I want to have a t-shirt that says, the net sucks, basically. You know, it sucks. Traditional AI is to all software as sugar is to all biology. It's omnipresent and boring. The wake-up call that I'm trying to share with you about China is broad, and it affects corporations who are relocating already and reevaluating their strategies. It affects VCs. I'll mention Sequoia, probably the most famous VC in America, had just been announcing that they're going to put 60% of their total funds into China when all this stuff happened. And now, oops, bad timing, guys. So they should have been saying, we'll spend 10% or no percent, because everyone's pulling the money out of China, they're not putting it in. Now, they could be contrarians, and I'm missing it, but I don't think so. Startups that had thought having a Shanghai office was really cool, now will see that as a serious liability. Investors, everybody wants out, from Hong Kong citizens to foreign direct investors, so FDI is falling. And then my favorite, which I think you guys, some of you were here, I was here with TAG about 2 years ago when John Cook came up, and in the middle of a roundtable discussion, I said, what happens to real estate when the Chinese pull out of the market? And then I wrote an SNS piece about this, and that became one of my favorite things in the last year. So that's exactly what happened in the Seattle real estate market. China pulled out, and the market went straight south. Every week, there's a new headline about how far straight south the real estate market in Seattle is going. Pretty interesting. Paul, again, something like pattern discovery, where I don't know anything about real estate, but you can make the call. So I always tell you how it's going in terms of numbers. Now, and I'm averaging, this helps me out, I average these things out over since the start of this work. Last year, my number was 95.2% accurate, and it dropped this year to 95.18. Again, an average over many years. And the main reason was because I made a big bet on what's called augmented immunity, and that hasn't come to pass yet. So it's a very hot item. Jeff Bezos gave $1 billion to the Hutch to work on this stuff. I think it's really good, important science, but it hasn't panned out yet. I think about 20% of these cures really work for people, not 100%. So here we go. These are the top 10 predictions for 2019. And what I'm going to do, as I always do, is I'm going to read these to you because I'll have to live and die by the sword. And the sword is the exact words that I use in saying these things. So forgive me for reading, but that's why I do it that way. So number 1, autonomous vehicles quickly ramp up global commercial expansion, moving from the safer racetracks of defined routes and neighborhoods to general metropolitan uptake in pilot cities around the world. The US leads in the technology, but China pushes the adoption. Number 2, the tariff war becomes a true economic war as, regardless of any March 1 agreement, China continues attacks on companies and countries in each of its Made in China 2025 target sectors, including cars, computers, smartphones, AI, chips, telecom equipment, aerospace, space exploration, renewable energy, and more. Global markets and standards split into 2 camps based on security, those of innovators and of infomercs. Number 3, Malt goes big. First described by SNS in November of 2013, the retail revolution driven by the integration of micro-mapping, advertising, location-based tech, and wireless transactions pops up everywhere. First adopted by Amazon Go, we'll see Malt now emerging in retail markets, outlets around the world. Number 4, this one's a little complicated. The 5 major technology battlefronts in 2019 will be A, cars, with a focus on electric autonomous cars. Example, there are up to 6 new major Chinese car companies that are planning to move into the US market during this year. B, energy, both nuclear and renewable technologies. C, infrastructure, 5G, example Huawei and ZTE versus Ericsson and Nokia. D, AI, China's top technical target in the West, top achievement. And E, healthcare, the major trends of computerized medicine and personalized healthcare put pattern computing and affordable genetics onto a single compelling track. Number 5, Facebook failing. Zuck Co. is dissed and dumped by droves of the disenchanted, disabused, and disappointed, with accompanying regulatory disdain and financial drops. A lot of D's in that one. Number 6, clouds lose their mantle of security. Despite the protestations of their respective vendors, F500 companies continue to hold back, part of a now reinforced long-term reluctance to move crown jewels out of headquarter data centers. Number 7, anger at FAANG, and FAANG is F-A-A-N-G. We need a new acronym for stock favorites. Companies that are out: Qualcomm, Apple, IBM, GM, Intel. Companies that are in: Amazon, Microsoft, Netflix, SoftBank, Tesla. Maybe we should call it Mantis. Number 8, Elon emerges triumphant as short sellers and negative media lose steam, and Elon proves that he is who fans think he is. Stories turn from doubt and scorn back to admiration, and the world has a real hero on its hands. Both SpaceX and Tesla do well in 2019. Number 9, the China crash. China enters a new phase of failure and decline as the property market, its last standing asset class, takes a dive. Global investors flee China's instability. The US, German, and Nordic economies remain relatively strong. Oz takes a hit. Number 10, AI expands. As AI goes wide and brings increased business returns per sector, but declining returns per year per company, new mathematical approaches used in unsupervised data runs provide the early shoots for the next generation of large-scale business returns. This becomes more generally known as pattern discovery. So that's it, and I am done. Thank you.